Our final speaker before the break is Dr. Juliette Guichon. She's an associate professor in the Cummings School of Medicine at the University of Calgary. We're separated by only a very small number of degrees, going back to the connections, and we are all one. I was recently reminded that we are both attendees. We went to the same high school, one of the United World Colleges that were set up after the Second World War to foster international understanding, even though we both came from Canada, so I guess we understand each other. And Juliette has got 2 law degrees, one from Oxford University and one from the University of Toronto, and she's been very active, especially in the area of child health advocacy. I've gotten to know her through a group. I'm not sure we're a formal, official group, but it includes people who took part in authoring the book that we're giving out to our speakers and door prizes, Public Health in the Age of Anxiety, and these are the religious and other roots of vaccine hesitancy in Canada. And she's been very active in formulating responses to anti-vaccination rhetoric. And she's here to speak to us today. She's got probably the most interesting title in our program, Amplifying the Voice of Public Health in the Face of Strongly Presented Public Opinion.
May I have a lapel mic? This one works. Yeah, but I'm going to move around. Yeah, okay, yeah. So I'll just get started, if I may. Sorry for that delay. I like to move around. So thank you so much for your welcoming me here. Thank you, Dr. Monica Noss, for the invitation. And I thank the government of British Columbia for welcoming me as its guest. I have, as you know, this opportunity to speak to you about amplifying the voice of public health. And this is the outline for the talk. We'll go through it quickly. So, you know, in the era of reconciliation, I think we must learn from the people who preceded us here. And one of the lessons is that we shouldn't come and suppose or presume that we should just talk. Because people want to know who you are. And it's rude, I'm told, by Chief Crowfoot in Calgary, not to just show up and start talking. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. My father was born on a ranch in BC during the flu epidemic, 1918. I was born relatively late in his life. The GP said to his mother, who was giving birth to her 4th child, "You may not go into hospital because you won't get out." So he was the only one to be born of European origin in a place called Guichon, BC, which is in the Nicola Valley. My mother, and I'll show you, this is my sort of a family tree. My mother's mother died 3 weeks after she was born from meningitis. So my mother was 3 weeks old when her mother died of infectious disease. My grandmother, the deceased grandmother, was 18, the oldest of 4 children, when she was orphaned because of diphtheria. The youngest in that family was 11. My parents were married without the 2 mothers present. So the mother of the groom, the mother of the bride were both absent. And the mother of the groom died, my paternal grandmother died of an ulcer, and that well could have been infectious disease. So it could be that my concern, dedication to infectious disease is really a family story. It's also true about me that I spent a lot of time on lacrosse fields. I played lacrosse for 3 years at Yale, 3 years at Oxford, and its teachings are embedded in my way of thinking. I worked as an articling student at a corporate commercial law firm on Bay Street, where it's a fine firm, and what you're taught there is to go to the wall for your client. So I regard, in particular, children as my client. Child health is my client. That's sort of my way of thinking. And I received a doctorate in law at the University of Toronto. And so my focus is child health and doing what I can to advance child health. This book just came out in January, published in the Netherlands. And by the way, it was a privilege to work with Dr. Ian Mitchell, my brilliant colleague, 45 years work in pediatrics, still practicing at the age of 76. And he's the one pediatricians often call for when they have difficult parents. He has a way of getting through to them. So it's obvious, but it's worth stating, that we protect what we value. We defend what we value. So we value the Mona Lisa. And look, we've got it behind bulletproof glass. We value our money. So we have this fence around the fortress, which is the Mint. We value, perhaps more in Alberta than elsewhere, but it has to be said that the oil sands is an economic driver of Canada, and there is concerns after the drone attack in Saudi Arabia whether the oil sands are protected. After the Las Vegas shootings, there has been concern about how to protect the people of Vancouver as they gather. And so there has been more protection, more defense for them. We protect sorry about the gap in the heads, we protect our political leaders strongly. And now they're halos. So the point I'm making is public health is valuable, but where's the defense? So when I think about public health, I have these metaphors that run through my mind. I don't know if they're useful to you, but they motivate me. So public health is a person. Public health is an edifice. Public health is a collaboration. It's a process. So as a person, it's a grandmother in my mind. Grandmothers are wise. They've got lots of experience. They're dedicated. They care. They care in particular for children. But grandmothers can need defense. They can be attacked, and they have relatively little defense. Public health is an edifice. And it's a huge edifice that, among other things, ensures a child is vaccinated. It also makes sure that the water is clean and so on. But as an edifice, I believe it needs protection. Because look what it does. There's a scientific consensus, which we know, based on the settled evidence, would have public benefit. And that bridge is public health. The bridge to the known research and the opportunity for benefit is public health. And children in particular can benefit. But what happens when things go wrong? It can be attacked by forces well beyond public health's control. And as I say, it has little defense. As a collaborative exercise, you can see how this works. You have people working hard even now, having identified what the coronavirus looks like. They're working hard to create a vaccine. We're going to need epidemiologists to assess it in the phases of the trial. But there'll come a point where we're going to vaccinate. And many of you are on the front line doing just that. And then we'll need other teams to evaluate the effectiveness in the community, how quickly it wanes, and so on. But this is a team, and the team is going in the right direction. It's preventing disease and death. But who stops people from going in the wrong direction? And it has to be stated, the wrong direction is not preventing disease and death. That is to say, promoting disease and death. And in the stories I'm going to tell you about, one was a group of Roman Catholic bishops, these well-known characters. Unfortunately, the major circulating daily in Canada, the Toronto Star, and there are others. But we need systems to prevent institutions from going the wrong way. And here's a halo, but it's meant to be over the face. This is my mindset, is that I played defense, and my way of thinking which was unconscious when I got started in this, it took me a while to figure it out, is you're not going to score on my watch. Right? If you're going to do that, not on my watch. So what are the origins of and the types of attacks? So I have to be careful in stating this because I know that I could be misinterpreted and I could be guilty of overstatement. Parents love their children, and they, in general, like almost always, and well, you know, I'm trained in law, right? I've read a lot of criminal cases. But they want what's best for their children. And so they can be hesitant, and we know about that. But if there's an adjuvant to hesitancy, it's probably this described in the Statistics Canada survey, which said that personality disorders affect 6 to 15% of the population. And among those personality disorders, which I respectfully suggest are relevant here as adjuvants, are paranoia. And so 5.6% nationally. If you work that out provincially, that'd be about 281,000 people in BC would have paranoia. And a colleague of mine who's an epidemiologist said that's a gross underestimate because people with paranoia don't show up for diagnoses. And 5.4% have personality disorder, which is about 271,000 people in BC. So paranoia would be would be big pharma, as if there's lots of money to be made in vaccination. You know, big pharma's out to get us. Personality disorder, you can't tell me what to do. I'm the one who knows how to look after my child. And I've heard this stuff, and I can tell you about that. Essentially, the attack on public health is not with weapons like guns, it's with speech. And so the defense has to come from more speech, better speech. And the speech must emphasize your expertise. Your expertise. We live in an age where your knowledge, training, learning, dedication is not valued sufficiently. You need better marketing. So examples of attacks. And some I'll be able to look at. Some are attacks on a public health program. Some, this newspaper attack. A university employs an anti-vaxxer. A judge rejects expert opinion from a forensic pathologist who's telling him why a child died of a vaccine-preventable disease. And defenders must defend all attacks, because remember, insofar as public health is an edifice, you can't allow any incursions into it. No matter who it is who's attacking your enterprise, there has to be security to protect it. Defenders must stand on guard for thee, because the consequences of not doing so can be dire. So let me take you now to some examples of such defense. In 2007, the Hpv vaccine, which had been funded by a $300 million grant by Prime Minister Harper's government, was rolled out initially in Ontario. It was one of the first jurisdictions to pick it up. It wasn't until 2008 that Alberta Health Services, which had been being reorganized, was able to roll it out in Alberta. And yet 10 school districts in Alberta refused to allow public health nurses to bring the Hpv vaccine in with their bags with the hepatitis B vaccine for grade 5 and grade 9 children. But it wasn't just Alberta. Yellowknife was not allowing it, nor was a school district just west of Toronto, quite large, about 500,000 people, Burlington, Oakville, Halton, Milton. So the argument advanced by this group of males who were employees of a foreign national was that publicly funded school districts could not, on their grounds, vaccinate girls, because remember the indication was for girls, against a disease that only girls could have. And this from an organization that does not admit women in leadership. Well, I had attended the Roman Catholic school system in Calgary, and I could not believe it. Frankly, I couldn't believe it from a legal perspective. But I had the benefit of being in the medical school, and I ran around talking to everybody. You know, oh, there's a pediatrician. What do you think about this? Oh, an obstetrician. What do you think about this? And everybody was angry, but angry to the point of muteness, which is not helpful, right, in terms of fighting speech. And so that was the point at which I realized, oh my gosh, these brilliant people with whom I work and who I admire greatly, they don't have a plan. So that's really how I got into this. So I didn't know anything about the HPV vaccine, and I must say that Dr. Eduardo Franco of McGill, who took my phone call, my cold call, and listened to me, he said, I will help you. And I am eternally grateful to him. He's now a member of the Order of Canada, an officer of the Order of Canada. He educated me about HPV. Every nonsense that I read online, he refuted, helped me understand. And without him, we would not have been successful. This is just a small group of the team. You see the Dean of Medicine. This is a radiation oncologist, pediatrician, sadly no longer with us because she died of cervical cancer. She received it, cervical cancer received it. She was attacked by the virus as a child. So she had early onset. Obstetrician, gynecologist, dean, PhD in preventive disease, and a school teacher, retired high school teacher. That's just part of the team. And these two women, as I say, are the heroes because they came forward. The first, I've told you about. The second, she wrote a letter saying, I was a virgin at marriage. I'm very sick with HPV. And they told their stories repeatedly, and that they were a great help to us. But I had to speak to teachers and nurses to find out what was going on. I didn't know much about vaccine delivery. You know, you have to inform yourself. And I had to promise confidentiality because there was a great risk at that time. There was tremendous fear that they would be fired if they spoke up. So we needed like labels, teams. We needed to be identified as a group. So we became HPV Calgary. Our logo, hugyourkids.org, it came because when people vaccinate their children, they hug them. You know, that was the idea. You know, you relinquish your child for vaccination, but you embrace the child afterward. That's what we were thinking when we created that URL. When we dealt with the Calgary one, which was the most populous group, but when we went national, we had to have a different logo because HPV Calgary wasn't going to work, of course. And most of those districts were rural, so that was the rural theme. We had clear goals in mind. We wanted to score. This was adversarial. There was no doubt about it. Our goals were easy vaccine access for children. We wanted parents' consent. Parents were consenting. It's just that the bishops had pressured the school trustees not to allow the administration to take place in school. We wanted vaccine uptake to increase. It was pretty low. We accepted from the beginning that this was adversarial. This is not the normal mindset in healthcare. I may be so bold as to suggest. It's my mindset. So, you know, you get ready for battle. And we knew we had opponents. Of course we had opponents. But we just stayed focused on child welfare. And there was lots of nonsense that came our way, but we never engaged in it. We had this strategy of escalating pressure. We waited to hear what the school district would say. We had these forays. We'd write them a letter. We'd wait to see how they responded. So we were respectful. We waited for the response. And there were particular districts which were very difficult. Calgary in particular, Medicine Hat, Leduc, Halton. These were crazy. This was 8 years ago. We looked differently then. We went to the media. We made our case to the media, which I was told was very difficult for the media because they couldn't see the other side. You know, media like to present a balanced story. They just couldn't understand the bishop's argument. The idea being that the vaccine would promote promiscuity in 9 and 10-year-old children. So we wrote letters, lots of letters. So I drafted them, some of them. This one happens to be in French, although I speak French. But this is a Quebecer. Some of you may know him. His specialty is in HPV. And he wrote, I asked him to, this was one of a number of letters in French that I solicited for a particular school district around St. Paul in northeast Alberta. So I would go to pediatricians with a letter and they would sign it. I would draft a letter for obstetricians. One of them would review it for their language and then circulate it for signature. I wrote the letter for the dean. He amended it, sent it. And then sometimes we had to go on the road, like a team. And we went to Yellowknife to speak at their school board meeting. And I took this picture because this is when Dr. Ian Mitchell, the pediatrician, is speaking about whether the HPV vaccine gives implied permission for sex. And that was responded to by Rob Bednarzik's important piece in Pediatrics 2012, which came like a miracle, in that it was a retrospective chart review that showed that there was no higher risk there was no greater risk-taking behavior among a cohort of non-vaccinated and vaccinated girls for HPV. So it decimated the bishop's argument. I went to Burlington for this. I went alone for this, although two professors from McMaster came to join me, thanks to my colleague who told them you have to go and help her. And they had written a book called Evidence-Based Infectious Disease, Fiona Smale and Mark Loeb. But the meeting was crazy. Like, you can see how my hands are shaking when I took this picture. It was, and that's why I say there may well be an element of mental health in this, because I don't have time, but it really was a distressing meeting. In fact, when I got outside, this fellow who had lost, we won by 7-2, but 2 votes against the HPV. We got outside, and one of the so-called losers, he chased me in the parking lot. And it was Fiona opened her car door and said, "Get in," and off we drove. So we went to Leduc. Infectious disease specialist Mark Jaffe from the University of Alberta. I'd never met him. He picked me up at the airport in Leduc, which is the Edmonton International Airport. We drove to that hearing. Here is a picture of Sarah, taken. This is my spot. And you can see the trustees doing their work. But there was one trustee, a male, who was an air traffic controller. The international airport's close by. And he was determined to be the smartest man in the room. And Mark actually is very, very clever, Mark Jaffe. And so he was sending him hostile questions like, "You cite Swedish data, you don't cite Canadian data. You're citing Swedish data," very hostilely asked. And Mark was very, very low-key. He said, "Yes, Swedish data is great. It's population data. We wish we had such great data." And he would go on like that, to the point where the air traffic controller, I think, had that role of being the dominant, the one who knew. It was very clear to everybody that role belonged to Mark. And so he blew up and he said, "This disease, cervical cancer, kills only 40 women a year in Alberta." So, I was thinking, what do I say? If anything I say at this stage will be unhelpful. So I was quiet, thinking, what's going to happen next? Because I hadn't anticipated that. And Mark said, "Yes, 40 women a year die every year in Alberta." He was just fantastic. And he said that's the pyramid. And then he explained what happens all the way up, from first diagnosis of cervical lesions all the way up. And then I had found my voice, and I said to the women in the room, I looked at them and said, "And there isn't a woman in this room who would want any of that." And of course, they voted in favor. So we had to create a website, which was, not was in my skill set, but you've got to learn, right? We took every opportunity we could to speak to the media because we're trying to give volume to public health, to its voice, radio, TV, print. And our clear messaging was, it turns out the vaccination doesn't cause promiscuity. And would it be marketable if it were? So the message really was the internet can be dangerous. We had challenges, lots of challenges. But ultimately, we were successful. But the challenges were politics, bureaucracy, some personal interests. But by May 2014, all publicly funded school districts in Canada have opened their doors to the HPV vaccine. And look at the uptake. If you look at the blue here, this is Calgary Catholic prior to opening the doors. And this was immediately after, the first dose after. And it's since climbed. So there have been false claims. You might remember this was February 2015. The Toronto Star, on its front page, talked about the dark side of the HPV vaccine, and what they were referring to was 6 cases of alleged adverse effects that the Toronto Star implied were causally related to the vaccine. One was a drowning in a bathtub. So what happened here is that Dr. Navarre, I didn't know about this article, but I received this message from Dr. Navarre here, and I have, I guess I wasn't on this, but Dr. Alison McGeer was on it. And he's saying, did you see this letter? Is there any response being formulated? We've got to do something. And then what I received was that, help. That was from Dr. McGeer, who you may see on the National, the wonderful Dr. McGeer, who's talking very sensibly and calmly about the coronavirus on CBC. If you haven't seen her, she's fantastic. Anyway, so she writes this, just one word, not even a signature. So what I saw was her coming downfield looking to pass. That was what, so you got to get ready, right? So this thing blew up. The first thing I did, though, was I called the op-ed editor of the Toronto Star, and I said, I'm calling you from Calgary. I'm not trained in health, but I want you to know that people are asking me to contact you because they're very upset. They're experts in infectious disease. And he said, oh, these investigative reporters are fabulous. They've done wonderful work. I said, that might be, but it doesn't appear that they've spoken to infectious disease experts before they published this story, and we'd like to submit an op-ed piece. And he said, well, I don't know, not sure if we'll let you do that. Send it to me. We'll see what. And I said, but this is really important. And he said, well, send it to me. And this was Friday, and he said, but we don't have space till Tuesday. And so I went back to the group, and we very quickly drafted. I did the first draft, but the wonderful thing about Alison was she had already amassed this group of people, and my draft went to them, and it was amended, and all the amendments Alison worked on. She was just wonderful. And by the time we submitted it, there were 48 authors. And so that's how it went. And this is how it appeared. And it appeared on Wednesday. Science shows HPV vaccine has no dark side. And you see, and the group decided that Dr. Rupert Krall would be the second author because he was the head of infectious disease at the University of Toronto. And I was first author because I wanted to take the heat, right? Because that's what we're trained to do in law. So I knew there would be blowback, so I wanted to stand in front of the people who were on front line delivering care. So by the time it actually ran, and this was on the website, 69 people had signed. So then we quickly followed up with another letter to the publisher asking, but by then we'd created a name, the Canadian Alliance to Support Immunization, and we have it also in French. And we wanted to have a national organization. This was all done in the heat of the moment. And we respectfully request, and I'll undo that because it's not on the right spot, we request that the Toronto Star immediately retract the article and video and remove them from the Star website. And that happened. That happened on February 20th. So the article appeared on February 5th. It was off their websites by the 20th. And that was because of the expertise that was given voice in Toronto. And it wouldn't have happened, I'm sure, had infectious disease specialists said, not on our watch, this is not going to happen. And then they concede. So at the beginning, they spoke about the wonders of this article, but then they concede there were some problems. And then they say, we remain committed to this line of reporting. However, we have concluded that in this case, our story treatment led to confusion between anecdotes and evidence. No kidding. So then we had the University of Toronto, just looking at the time, anthropology professor. She was promoting an anti-vax mandate. By then we had a little logo. And 45 people wrote about this professor. Asking for an investigation, and there was an investigation, and unfortunately, the investigation found that her materials could have benefited from the science community, but nevertheless they were acceptable. So you can't always win. Defending fluoridation. You might know that dental decay is the most common chronic disease of childhood. It's an infectious disease. Calgarians voted for fluoridation in 2 plebiscites. It is the will of the people. But 10 city councillors voted to cease fluoridation in February 2011. And this is just one example of the outcome, that the need for intravenous antibiotic therapy for children has increased 700%, 8 times. So I got into this because a dentist told me at a funeral that I had to do something. And I thought somebody had fainted. I didn't know what she was talking about. So I got into this, had to learn what it was. So the strategy here is to give volume to the voice of public health and to quieten the other voices. And this is the index case. This is the super spreader of nonsense. His name is Dr. Robert Dixon, a family doc in Calgary. So he went to the University of Calgary, 3 years medical education. He has an undergraduate degree in medicine, undergraduate degree in phys ed. And he is acting as the medical officer of health. So we created this website. These are children from my department at the department picnic. We had a media event where we were trying to encourage, during the city election, encourage the election of pro-fluoridation candidates. Children helped us with decorations. Here's the halo. This is in the studio of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. This is the setup, getting set up for the media event. And at this stage, sorry for this, at this stage, my goal is to transmit knowledge about how to do this work, because we need more people and we need young people to engage in it. So that's why I'm trying to highlight the young people and how they're learning as we're doing this. You see that young man? You know, he's really, you can see, as an educator, I just find this wonderful, that face. He's really taking it in. We had various members of our community. The dental hygienist is speaking, but we have a general dentist, an orthodontist, a grandfather, a mother whose child had general anesthetic before the age of 4 to deal with whole mouth decay, and a physician, a pediatrician. And of course, the media were there. They picked it up the very next day. Then we kept pressure up. We kept the pressure up for quite some time. This was an op-ed piece. And this led to this cartoon, which really angered some, but it angered our opponents. But this is a win. This is what success looks like when you're promoting, you're advancing the voice of public health. And we had an event to which we welcome people, but I must say there were people present who encouraged me to think about that 2012 mental health survey. So we kept the pressure up through all sorts of activities until finally City Council put it back on its agenda. And again, we kept the pressure with these public clinics, parents lining up to have their kids looked at, dentists volunteering their time at in a low-income area in Calgary near the airport at the northeast. And we're collecting data about what we're seeing. And here finally, October 29th, just a couple of months ago, these are med students telling city councillors about asking parents for informed consent as their child is going in for general anesthetic, because the child has whole mouth decay and they're in what the dentist called the pre-cooperative stage. But with fluoridation, if they were to get whole mouth decay, because we have new Canadians, they don't know about oral hygiene, it would have happened later, about 8 apparently. So now we need general anesthetic. And this, in our hospital, the one hospital room with dental equipment was never meant for well children. It was meant for children with Downs and other complications. But now anesthetic clinics have had to open to deal with the demand for dental care under general anesthetic. I reported Bob Dixon with 3 of my colleagues in this group to the College of Physicians and Surgeons. So this is the effort to quieten the voice, because he has spread his nonsense to the Calgary Herald, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and elsewhere. So once I identified that he was the index case, it's important to treat him as such and to try to isolate and quieten him. And so he the College of Physicians and Surgeons was launching an investigation. So they had extensive documentation from me, which I had drafted, but 2 friends who are lawyers helped me with it. So it was very good by the time it left our hands. So it was full of evidence of things he had said publicly and how he'd used his medical credentials. And he does not like to be investigated. And so he has sued the College of Physicians and Surgeons. This is public, which is why I'm showing it to you. It was filed in December in the Court of Queen's Bench in Calgary. And he says in paragraph 17, let's see, it doesn't line up properly. He says, the complaint and associated process, including the preparation of initial written response and the prospect of an interview or another written response, has caused me not only inconvenience, but also stress and mental harm. Dr. Dixon is suffering. The children are suffering. So this battle continues. We have to advocate continuously, but the matter has gone to City Water Engineering now. They've been asked to come up with a cost estimate. So I'm hoping that we've moved beyond safety and efficacy, and now it's just cost effectiveness. We're on very strong ground there. So stay tuned on that. And so now in conclusion, as you know, I just want to read from this. As you know, our collective goal, the goal of everyone in the room, is to prevent disease. And we have to recognize that public health is valuable, but it's under threat. It needs defense, because we have to expect that this is going to happen. Governments should expect that this is going to happen. And governments, in my respectful opinion, should help. We don't need a lot of money. We just need a little bit from time to time to mount a rapid response quickly. Because you waste time begging people for money, right? Friends, wealthy people in the community, and they don't always get it. So we have to work together to stop this. We have to power this. And this is saying we've got to catch up. We can't let them score, because they're destined to score unless somebody stops them. And I'd like to conclude by reminding you of another grandmother, whom I think is a metaphor for public health. She has a lot of experience. She's well-trained, dedicated, industrious. She reads the literature. She seeks to improve well-being. She stays calm and carries on despite internal dysfunction. She wears gloves. She's just like you. Who wouldn't want that gig? Thank you very much. Should I go sit down?
Thank you very much, Juliette. You can see why Juliette won the Canadian Public Health Association National Public Health Hero Award.